Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of USA Global TV and Radio. The content presented is for informational purposes only and is intended to foster open discussion and debate. Viewer discretion is advised. USA Global TV and Radio does not endorse any particular viewpoint and encourages viewers to seek out additional information and perspectives. Saving America with Dr. David D. Schein.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein. And the stories just keep rolling in. Off your elections in the future. Across America, we usually refer to the elections for federal office that are not tied to the presidential elections as the off-year elections, the next being 2026. However, there were some important elections this past week in New York City, New Jersey, and Virginia. Here in Houston, there was a crowded field to replace the congressional rep from District 18. I've been the victim of decades of poor representation in Congress here in that 18th district. The last two elected have died in office. The slot has been vacant for 6 months. I don't think anybody noticed. As I anticipated, two who ran on anti-Trump slates will be in the runoff. Neither would be acceptable to me. However, the district has been redrawn for the 2026 election, so maybe the skies will be brighter with a better electorate map a year from now. The New York City race garnered much of the publicity for this election season. An anti-Semitic Dirty Commie with no management experience was elected. I understand that 30% of the Jewish vote went for him. That makes no sense to me. I call for a total boycott of New York City for the length of his term. No visits, of course, but see who you do business with. If their headquarters are still in New York City after this, cut them off. As they say, elections have consequences. Let's deliver. In Virginia and New Jersey, a low turnout resulted in the election of two losers. My message to taxpayers in both states: many of you stayed home, so you get to enjoy high taxes, high electric bills, and boys and girls bathrooms. Hope you're happy with yourselves for taking the day off instead of voting. Given the excellent job Glenn Youngkin did as governor of Virginia, I'm surprised that the election was for a Democratic slate. This was made worse by Dem Jay Jones being elected Attorney General in Virginia after putting in writing that he wanted a GOP legislator dead and his two children. Who votes for scum like this? For President Trump, I ask you to do full audits to see how many illegals voted in the elections above. Time to crack down. It's also crucial that the GOP take the 2026 elections very seriously. Put guards at polling places. Watch how mail-in ballots are handled. The only good news is that the Dems blew $100 million on those elections in New Jersey and Virginia, supposedly both blue states. I hear they are having trouble raising funds. Maybe that will be the message to the GOP for 2026. Get out there and spend some money. Frankly, despite these election results, I still predict that the GOP victory will be in November of 2026. America will return to nuclear testing. About 18 months ago, I released an article about the fact that the world is already in the second Cold War. I lived through the first Cold War. It started due to the incompetence of American leadership following World War II. It was basically a battle of America and its allies versus the USSR. By 1990, this massive experiment in communism had failed and the USSR had broken up, but not before millions upon millions of people had died. Had American leadership been competent, we would not be in a second Cold War. I refer to the new New York City mayor as a dirty commie. That is what we called the USSR and its allies back then. No need to change the nomenclature today. It's still true. During the first Cold War, it was unthinkable that there would be a commie elected anywhere in this wonderful country. Now we have clowns like Mamdani in several large cities and close to it in a couple governor's mansions. We even have the fake commie Bernie Sanders as a senator. Hopefully these clowns will show their true colors and regional failed experiments will fail again. Over 30 years ago, nuclear testing was stopped by agreement. An agreement between the USA and Russia was reached. The two powers were going to gradually reduce the number of nuclear weapons and hopefully save our planet for future generations. The problem with this idyllic picture is that it was a fraud from the get-go. I never believed Russia would play by the rules. Then you have multiple other countries that are now considered nuclear powers. The elephant in the room is that China has been focusing much of its efforts on a large army and nuclear weapon development. Even the joke country, North Korea, may have starving people, but has been making nuclear weapons. The trigger recently was at the Russian test of a nuclear torpedo. This could change the outlook for ocean warfare in the future. Trump, to his credit, did not take the report laying down. He has announced that America will resume testing nuclear weapons again. I endorse this step. Further, we need to make sure that the USA and its allies have the best weapons in terms of destructive power. Of course, wherever you make nuclear weapons, you need the ability to deliver them in multiple formats. In my article, I recommended that America and its allies need to control the seas and outer space. Because of cost and the new axis of evil around the globe, we need reliable allies such as England, Japan, Israel, Argentina, Italy, and Australia that will provide resources and geographic diversity. Obviously, we need to have the latest defensive technology like some form of the Iron Dome that is protecting Israel. The objective is not to have a nuclear war, but as proven in the first Cold War, time to ensure that the commies know that we will blow them off the face of the earth if they start something. The cliche from the first Cold War is assured mutual destruction, or AMD. That is exactly why the whack job running the CCP, has not tried to take Taiwan by force. In my book, I don't want AMD, I want them destroyed if they start something while the rational folks, Americans and our allies, survive. That's why we need to do better. Related to this, the recent reported deal between Xi and Trump on rare earth and soybeans is a short-term deal. First, the CCP has never kept a deal in their history. Second, the USA and its allies must be able to stand on their own. You can't be dependent on energy, arms, natural resources, or medical supplies from an enemy that wants to see you destroyed. It is that simple. No more America and its allies being suckers. Will there be some short-term costs? Sure, but well worth it. And speaking of the first Cold War, Arctic frost investigation reveals shades of the old USSR and the KGB. Arctic frost is the label for the incredible abuse of America's investigative and police resources for purely political purposes. Best I can tell, this is the worst political scandal ever in the history of the United States. The current investigation is being headed by GOP Senator Chuck Grassley. Jack Smith is the pivotal actor in this American disgrace. He was appointed by Merrick Garland as some type of attorney for the government, specifically to run something that would make the old KGB of the USSR proud. The cover story was that the Biden-Harris administration was mad because Trump and his supporters challenged the results of the 2020 election. I find this alone humorous since Al Gore challenged the 2000 results and Hillary the 2016 results. So the cover story itself is ridiculous as a justification. We know these Republican senators had their mobile phone records analyzed in secret. Lindsey Graham, Bill Hagerty, Josh Hawley, Dan Sullivan, Tommy Tuberville, Ron Johnson, Cynthia Loomis, Marsha Blackburn. along with Republican Representative Mike Kelly. I believe Ted Cruz was also scanned. I have personally reviewed the list of about 200 subpoenas that were obtained by Jack Smith. The judge who signed them should be investigated for possible impeachment. Most of the subpoenas ordered the phone companies and others not to tell these people that they were being investigated. This is inexcusable in America. The number of Americans in conservative organizations like Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA, who had their privacy invaded, was about 400. Arctic Frost was even used to pull financial records of conservative groups and individuals. This was naked political harassment a la the old KGB. Like many other Americans, conservative or not, a full investigation and then, as appropriate, prosecution must take place soon. Many of the underlings are still employed by the taxpayers, even though the head dogs are gone. Correcting and punishing the wrongdoers must happen now. Many conservatives are worried that this is all bluster and that prosecutions will not follow. Time to get on the stick. Department of Justice is probing BLM for fraud. Several years back, I heard a report that the leader of the BLM movement put family on the payroll and had a mansion paid for from BLM funds. Of course, that was during the Biden-Harris administration. There was no real investigation. I've heard that this bogus movement took in about $100 million. Well, those who sent money in deserve to have it wasted, in my humble opinion. The Justice Department is finally doing a fraud investigation of BLM. Way too late, in my opinion, but glad it is happening.
All rise.
Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. And I'm sure you will agree with that when you see our next guest, Kelly Oken. She started as a pro golfer, and boy, she's got quite a history, and now runs a company called Fairway to Green. We'll hear some more about that. She has a fascinating bio as she's a lifetime outdoors person, explains that being outdoors neatly tied into golf. Early on, she had a 5-year internship with the Nicholas companies and was recruited, this is from high school, recruited to the College of William & Mary's Division I golf team. Now, she's not your typical jock, you understand. She was very active while in college, including being active on the Student Athlete Advisory Council. She also studied Russian, which led to study abroad program in St. Petersburg and Moscow. She graduated with a BBA in marketing and a double major in history. Following college, she became part of the National Women's Golf Association Tour, now called the East Coast Women's Golf Tour. After competing all over the world for 4 years, she moved into golf marketing but continues to give back to the sport. Diagnosed 13 years ago, she has worked to raise awareness for celiac disease. In her celiac series, each May for Celiac Awareness Month, she interviews members of the gluten-free community on her blog, Going Pro with Kelly O. This past April, I met Kelly in person at the Darden School at the University of Virginia, where she was wrapping up her MBA. I had to shorten this bio so I'd have time for the interview. We welcome Kelly Oken for her first appearance on Saving America.
Thank you so much, Dave. That intro was way too kind.
Not at all. So our society places a huge focus on big name college athletics, especially the big three sports. Share your approach to helping with promoting other sports.
Growing up and playing all of the sports, basketball and baseball, some of the big three were, some of my top sports before I started playing golf. I never considered there to be a big three sports. I think every sport is special. Every sport has its own skill set, and each sport helps you improve and excel in every other sport. I know that basketball and baseball really helped my foundation with my golf swing, and I'm sure some of my golf mental game helped with some of my basketball strategy. So it's hard for me to say that there's a big three. I know financially there's definitely a big three out there and maybe in viewership, but from a playing perspective, I think every sport deserves to have its time to shine, and it deserves all its players because everyone's going to be able to find their sport that's right for them.
And it seems that the number of sports is expanding. I mean, unfortunately, it just shut down, but they started a professional rugby team here in Houston, and there's a league for that. And I remember rugby being an oddball sport where it only played at places like UVA. and in some of the Ivies in the military academies. So it's interesting how things are expanding. And of course, one of the things I'm excited about is expansion of co-ed sports, where when I was a little kid, which is a long time ago, they just had Little League for boys. And now we've got a lot of co-ed sports for little kids. And then, of course, we separate that out, hopefully, as they get a little bit bigger. But soccer is certainly, I think, going to rival the other, as we refer to them, the big three. But I think it's going to be the big 4 or 5 as things go. And, of course, golf got a lot of headline the other day. Didn't Trump show up on the golf course during the Ryder Cup?
He was there. Yes, he was in New York, I believe, for the first or second round, if I remember correctly.
So it's we're out there. The world is very different for female athletes versus male athletes. Share with our audience how you're working to bring more balance to that picture.
Yeah, that's really what inspired me to start Fairway to Green. So I had played Division I golf and then professional golf for a few years afterwards, and it's interesting to see how different the world is from the male and female perspective, and there's just so much more money on the men's side of the game. And I know that my competitors and I on different tours on the women's side, we'd be working a few extra jobs just to help ends meet. And the men that were playing at the same level as us had their entry fees paid for. They had more opportunities to get sponsorships. So they were showing up with new logos on their golf bags every day to the driving range. And that's nothing against them. It's just I wish that women had more of that opportunity, because there are so many talented athletes that are having to drop out of their chasing their dream to the LPGA because they're running out of money. And so when I was working at Buffalo Group, I had the opportunity to work for Morning Read, which was a golf news website or media property. And at the time, I was able to leverage a partnership with Sports Illustrated to try to get more eyes on the Epson Tour, which is the LPGA's qualifying tour. Because in my mind, if we can get more eyes on the women who are playing, we can get more investment dollars heading their way, both to the individual players and to the tours. And so that is really what inspired me to start Fairway to Green. I'm still covering all of the professional news out there for the men and the women's tours, because I believe we need men to grow women's sports, and we need and women are fans of men's sports, as we're not just in our own corner. So I believe that the way to get more girls to play sports and keep playing sports is to give them role models to look up to, and that's where the media coverage comes in. But college was a huge opportunity for me, and I know so many other girls would benefit from having that same opportunity. So we're also launching a college recruiting platform to really match these kids with different programs that fit their criteria and help them get the education that they need to thrive wherever they go next.
Well, when you mentioned that you were a Division I program at the College of William and Mary, and of course, I'm close to that. I went to high school in Norfolk, Virginia, and then I went down the street to UVA. And is golf, in terms of women's golf, is most of the availability in Division I at big schools, or more small schools starting to have women's golf teams?
There are actually over 1,000 women's golf programs in the U.S., and quite a bit of them are in the Division I space. William & Mary is a small D1, but there's still plenty of scholarships in the D1 space that people can look for. Scholarships look a little different in Division III just because they're academic. There are no athletic scholarships in that space. I see you pointing at yourself. But we always know that the top recruits are going to find schools, and the top schools are always going to find recruits. So what my platform is trying to do is help those other 95% of schools and players find each other and find their best match.
Well, it sounds like a great objective. So what is your advice for women who want to follow in your footsteps, whether in golf or in your business success?
Yeah, I had to reflect on this one a little bit, because I think when people see me, they see I'm really passionate about what I'm doing, and that hasn't led me astray yet. I feel like as long as I've been following my passions, I've been living a very fulfilled life. And I've also had to spend a lot of time reflecting on my values, because I realized that I will give 110% to whatever project or business or career I'm working on. But if it's not aligned with something I feel very morally supportive of, I see that as I'm misusing my time. So I think it's really important to figure out what your passions are. I think that's, golf has been my passion since I was a little girl. I had no idea where I would be at this point, but there's always a way to make something happen there. And then if you're looking at your values too, it's a really great lens to help you filter through different opportunities. It's also about your lifestyle. I really treasure relationships with family and friends and coworkers and classmates and things like that. And I might put quality of life above money, or some people might say I really need to pay off those student loans. So for the next 5 years, I'm going to prioritize money just so that I can, get back to that evil or that level stage. So I think it's really just figuring out the lifestyle you want to live, figuring out your passions and letting those lead you down a path to find your interests, and then using whatever skill sets you have and that you've created for yourself to make that life your future.
Now, speaking of the business side of things, you've gotten off to such a fantastic start. I do have to ask, because I'm somebody who also put my life on hold at a certain point, went back to school, happened to be the University of Virginia PhD program. But in your case, what inspired you to suddenly say, I think I'll take 2 years off and go one of the most competitive MBA programs in the United States and not be out on the golf tour and doing the stuff that you were doing before that?
Yeah, it was actually a very last minute decision. I have actually my old academic advisor at William and Mary to thank for that. He first brought up the idea to me, like, have you ever considered getting an MBA? And so when I was working at Buffalo Group, I was, like I said before, I was leading a partnership between Sports Illustrated and the Epson Tour. And Sports Illustrated bought Morning Read, and I was not part of the team going over to Sports Illustrated, but I saw how the partnership was working. It was helping the women on the Epson Tour, and so I was like, you know what, I need to keep doing this. I can't wait for someone to hire me. And so that's when I said, I also need to learn finance and accounting again, because I didn't go so hot in undergrad. I was more of a marketing person. And I knew that going to a great business school like Darden would really expand my networking and alumni pool. So I applied to Darden on the very last day of round 3. It was very last minute. I thought about getting an MBA for about 2 weeks and didn't realize that Darden was still an option until I talked to Brett Twitty at admissions, and he said, no, there's still time, you should apply. And I'm just so grateful I did. It was an incredible 2 years, and I'm so thankful for all the opportunities it gave me and the background now and the confidence to talk about finance and accounting, which I definitely needed.
Absolutely, yes. I had my own business in college, and then I didn't know anything about accounting and finance, and was 100% marketing. And so it was very interesting to do the Darden MBA program and say, oh, this is what I was supposed to be doing with the books and stuff like that. So it was a very interesting experience for sure.
And a testament to the professors. They're all incredible at Darden, and they made learning easy.
Absolutely. How can our audience get more information about your professional activities as well as your advocacy for persons who are celiac?
Of course. Yeah. Well, you have our website at fairwaytogreen.com, and we're also on all our social media platforms. We have a new podcast that just launched from some of our writers on the Fairway to Green team called The Draw, that recaps all of our tournaments or all the tournaments around the world. We also send out a newsletter twice a week, so we'd love to have you on as a subscriber. And if you happen to be a brand that wants to dip your toes into women's sports advertising, we're always looking for partners in that space. As for the celiac side, like you said earlier, in May, we have Celiac Awareness Month. So we're always looking for people to interview that have had experiences in the gluten-free space, whether you're recently diagnosed, have been diagnosed for a couple decades, or maybe you're just starting to look into launching a gluten-free brand or anything like that. I'm always happy to chat. I love meeting people. So please feel free to reach out on my website at kellyoakengolf.com as well.
Please proceed.
More tax on federal agents doing America's work. As an American who values law and order in my neighborhood, I want criminals rounded up and prosecuted. That makes our streets safer and probably lowers our insurance rates. The terrorists, robbers, rapists, and murderers must be removed from our communities before more of us fall victim. They have little to lose, and in many jurisdictions, they're often arrested and released by so-called Soros prosecutors. I work 7 days a week. Why would I waste my time standing outside a facility where ICE agents were arresting criminals? I like to hear about it, as each arrest makes America safer. What I do not want to hear is that criminals disguised as political protesters are trying to interfere and in some cases hurt or kill these law enforcement officers. Across America, in Democrat-controlled cities, there are allegations that crowd members have violently attacked Homeland Security, ICE, and other agents doing their job. The people arrested and detained have significant records, including drunk driving with injuries. Enough is enough. This is referred to as an 80-20 issue. 80% of Americans want safety and security. They do not want to have their family shattered by rape, murder, or death, and of course, injury due to drunk driving. This pairs with the recently visible scandal of sanctuary states giving CDLs, commercial driver's licenses, without qualifications or requirement that the person speak English. I am pleased to see the feds are cracking down on the improper issuance of CDLs across the country. A surprising report is from Indiana, where 223 people were arrested in a sting operation, and more than 140 of them were illegals driving trucks. Speaking as an attorney, I'm trying to figure out why any business would allow someone not fully qualified to drive one of their vehicles. The legal liability from this is enormous. I see ads on TV from plaintiff attorneys looking to sue on behalf of people injured in truck accidents. Why would the companies want to increase their liability?
How does the defendant plead?
The Dems and free money. As a taxpayer and patriotic American, I'm offended at the giveaways of my hard-earned money to illegals, fraudsters, and folks too lazy to go to work. For the few of you listening who disagree with this, don't get too excited. Obviously, those who are disabled through no fault of their own or do not make enough money to cover basic food and health care need to be protected. That is the wonderful part about America. My point is we are giving away a great deal more than that, and it needs to stop now. I note that with government shutdown, it was revealed that 40 million Americans get SNAP benefits. Sorry, folks, I do not believe that number should be anywhere near that high. I strongly suspect that many of the illegals led in by the Biden-Harris administration and their cronies did this on purpose. This is basic vote buying, an age-old Dem strategy. For years, I've been the voice calling for dramatic reduction in what the federal government does. Now is that time. SNAP and Medicaid should both be dropped by the feds. Have each state take care of its own. We taxpayers pay the federal government for Social Security and Medicare, and that should continue to be done by the feds. Everything else handled by the states. For instance, I saw a report from the Center for Immigration Studies that 47% of non-citizen households with children under 6 use SNAP and WIC, Women and Children Benefits, versus 31% of American citizen households. The first number should be 0, and the second number should be at least half that.
Please raise your right hand.
An unpleasant note, Ford sets a record on recalls. American car company Ford has announced recalls of over 400,000 vehicles since the first of this year. While admittedly some of the recall repairs are minor, it is not a good sign. I note that I've in the past had 2 Fords, both a 1966 Mustang and a 1985 Mercury Sable were lousy in terms of mechanical reliability and design. At least the Mustang was fun to drive as long as you did not need the brakes to work. So if you're driving a late model Ford, go online and check to see if your vehicle is on the list. If so, check with your nearest dealer to get it fixed. Some recalls that are fairly recent may not be ready to repair yet.
Objection, Your Honor.
New study says hot drinks before bed could be healthy. I found the results of a newly released study that was done by San Diego State University and a couple of other schools. The study compared hot and cold drinks before bedtime to see how it impacted sleep, mood, and yes, flatulence. Hey folks, I just report this stuff. The study results are for white and Asian participants. The explanation of this focus that there were not enough Black and Hispanic participants for statistical conclusions. The study looked at anxiety, insomnia, and gut discomfort. This was part of SDSU's Healthy Aging Survey, which investigates novel risk factors and health disparities across the U.S. population. Other schools participating were Wake Forest University and the University of California at San Diego. So perhaps give that warm beverage before dinner and before bedtime another look.
May I remind you, you're still under oath.
Crackhead Caverns and the Lost Sea Adventure. Part of the fun of doing my own webcast is that sometimes I get to do something different. Recently, I was on vacation with the kids and grandkids in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. It's kind of like the Las Vegas Strip for kids and their parents. This is in the foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains. One day, we took a 90-minute drive west to Sweetwater, Tennessee. Arriving at what seemed to be a classic tourist attraction for kids, the Lost Sea Adventure, I was pleasantly surprised, being a history buff. The tourist attraction is built around historic and natural wonder, the Crackhead Caverns. Prior to the 1800s, the Cherokee Indians used the caverns as their special meeting place for their tribal councils. In fact, the name comes from the original owner, Chief Crackhead. Many Indian artifacts, including pottery, weapons, and jewelry, have been found deep inside the caverns in a space now known as the Council Room. Some are on display in the entry to the attraction. There is a gap in the history from when it was Cherokee and then it was not. I can understand why the locals did not want to focus on that. The Cherokees were forced to leave their homeland by the U.S. government in the early 1800s. In fact, this led to the famed Trail of Tears, according to reports. In any event, for visitors, advance tickets are available and the costs are reasonable. There is ample free parking. Our initial reservation was for 10:30, and when we realized it was going to be longer than expected ride from Pigeon Forge, we called them. The Lost Sea folks are very cooperative in moving our tickets to a later time. Upon arriving, we were placed with a group and met our guide, Skylar. He was a pleasant man with a good sense of humor and presented the history of the caverns as we walked along. The tour is not for everyone. It's reasonably accessible, but covers a fair amount of ground over about 90 minutes. There are some slippery spaces and some declines and inclines. I recommend bringing a sweater and closed-toe shoes with good tread. Just fair warning, the restrooms are only in the ticketing area, none in the caverns. As our guide explained, the arriving European settlers found the caverns, which are a constant 58 degrees, perfect for storing produce and other items. During the Civil War, the Confederacy mined for saltpeter, a key component in making gunpowder. A large wooden vessel was on display in the caverns where bat dung, I thought it was going to be some type of mineral, but it's bat dung, was put in a wooden vessel and then very hot water was poured over it. The liquid was drained from the bottom and then collected. Then the key ingredients were extracted from the liquid. That operation went on from about 1860 to 1863 until the Union forces entered that area. I'm not really sure of the involved chemical process, but I don't need to know more. Nearby, there is graffiti in the cave from 1863. It has been carbon tested and authenticated as being 160 years old. Another interesting aspect was in the early 20th century during Prohibition, moonshiners operated 3 stills and dance halls. One of the stills is still on display inside the caverns. But why is the attraction called the Lost Sea Adventure? Of course, there's a story to that. Our guide Skylar explained that the underground cavern lake was discovered in 1905 by a 13-year-old local, Ben Sands. He played in the caverns often and squeezed his small frame through an opening. He was in a room so large he couldn't see its walls with his lantern. He threw mud balls in all directions and heard splashes in all directions. Ben tried to tell his dad about the hidden lake, but when he brought his father into that part of the caverns, the water table had risen and closed the access that he had used. Another interesting discovery was in 1939 when explorers found the fossilized remains of a Pleistocene jaguar and an elk fawn, which led to an excavation by paleontologists from the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. Sadly, those bones were taken to that museum. In return, there are plaster models of some of the remains and a footprint of the jaguar in the entry area of the attraction. The theory is that the jaguar 20,000 years ago somehow got into the caverns, lost its way, never found its way out again. In the mid-1960s, an effort was made to investigate the caverns as a bigger tourist attraction. The water table at that time was lower, and they discovered the massive underground lake. In a cool note, Ben Sands was still alive, and they connected with him. There's a portrait of him in his 70s by the entrance. Up to this time, entering the caverns was an effort. There were steps constructed into the caves from the natural entrance. However, for a modern tourist attraction, a different approach was needed. Today, at the current entrance, there's a large yellow tunnel that is about 35 feet long. The guide meets you there and does his introduction before entering the actual caverns. The sites above are described by the guide while also pointing out normal cave formations. An unusual formation are anthrodytes, also known as cave flowers. They grow very slowly and are on the ceiling of the caverns. The tour takes the visitors into various parts of these large caverns, with the featured part, the underground lake, near the end of the tour. Flat-bottom boats, which hold about 20, quietly give the tour groups a chance to see the lake in more detail. The lake is reportedly the largest underground lake in North America. An odd feature is rainbow trout that have been added to the lake. As the boats approach, the fish swarm around the boats to get fed. The trout live for 5 or 6 years, and then another batch is added to the water for another term. The boat ride is fairly short, perhaps 10 minutes. We then bid our guide goodbye with our thanks. Like most tourist attractions these days, the exit is through the gift shop. I had hoped for some local items, but much of what I saw was made in China. On the way to the parking lot, we stopped in a little village nearby. A sweet shop and a glass blowing studio were located there. There were some very interesting locally made glass items. So, over 250 years of history and a tour of a natural wonder, all in 90 minutes.
Silence in the court.
Slopstream media misrepresents gang invasion from Venezuela. In a fascinating report by Jared Stepman in the Daily Signal, the correctly titled Slopstream media has presented the TDA terrorism infiltration of the USA under the Biden-Harris administration as just the TDA taking advantage of an unprotected border. However, citing the New York Post, it credited a report titled Venezuela Examining Regime Ties to Tren de Agua. It says that intelligence officials think that the Venezuelan socialist regime, led by President Nicolas Maduro, has facilitated the illegal migration of gang members into the U.S., quote, to advance what they see as the Maduro regime's goal of destabilizing governments and undermining public safety. The Daily Signal indicated that the motivation of the Slopstream media, like the discredited New York Times, is that if this is just TDA sneaking in, that hurts the use of the Alien Enemies Act. However, if a failed commie government is helping that invasion, that supports the use of the act by the Trump administration. Consistent with my support of the use of the act against these deadly gangs is a stunning recent report from New York City. As we reported recently on Saving America, a gang of 11 teens attacked some police trying to stop a robbery. They were reported to be part of TDA. Apparently, all had previously been arrested, but were in a shelter, likely at public expense, instead of a holding facility somewhere. New York City must do more to protect the public. During my recent brief visit, I was constantly concerned about the safety of my family members while visiting there for a family event.
I'll allow it.
Many of my audience know that my day job is as a full-time professor. My school struggles to build even a simple building. So this following story is upsetting to me in a real way. Dozens of pro-Hamas protesters arrested after storming University of Washington buildings, setting dumpsters on fire. From a report by Bridget Chavez from Seattle's King 5 local news. The apparent aim of these terrorists, described as anti-Israel student group, is that the University of Washington divest itself from Boeing. The supposed reason is that Boeing has defense contracts with Israel. The irony is that this beautiful new $150 million engineering building included $10 million in funds from Boeing. Incredibly, this anti-civilization scum caused an estimated $1 million in damage, and the building cannot presently be used safely. This time I want them charged, jailed, and fully prosecuted. If they are illegal, they need to serve their time and then be dumped out of the country immediately. If the losers in Washington state do not do this, then I call on Pam Bondi and her team to prosecute them for domestic terrorism. On the positive side, UW says it will not be intimidated by the protesters and noted its 100-year relationship with the aerospace company. Well, at least that's a start. Hey, UW, why were these terrorists not stopped before they caused so much damage? A sad footnote to the story was the following, quote, undergraduate student William Neal arrived to study Tuesday afternoon to find the building closed and guarded. I was like, wow. What on earth happened? No said, I never thought this would happen. Locking yourself into a building or barricading yourself in. It's just unheard of here.
Order in the court.
Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. Once you hear from our next guest, I'm sure that you will agree that she deserves the moniker of interesting person. Saving America welcomes Dr. Catherine Schein, who is a world-class scientist, and I'm proud to share with my Saving America audience that she is my sister. She earned her Bachelor of Science at the University of Pennsylvania with honors. She then earned her Master's in Bioengineering from MIT. She was offered a fellowship to the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, where she earned her PhD in microbial technology. She then worked at a biotechnology leader, Biogen, in Switzerland. She created one of the first processes for something known as recombinant protein production, which means making proteins that were genetically cloned, working on alpha interferon and other cytokines. She later returned to academic research, researching allergies, working on useful vaccines, and determining what makes proteins toxic. This included such critical work as looking at chemicals that could prevent or reverse the aggregation of protein in Alzheimer's disease. She and her husband later moved to the United States, where they both worked at the University of Texas Medical Center at Galveston. She's a heavily cited author who continues to work on protein allergies and viruses. In the United States, we have a problem with not enough of our young people interested in math and the sciences. Dr. Schein has helped to bring an aspect of advanced medical science to the public with her new book, Conditionally Toxic Proteins. Now, before you change the channel, listen for a few minutes to help you see how connected we are all to this topic. We welcome Dr. Catherine Schein for her first appearance on Saving America. Most of us assume that protein is something all us humans need to survive. What is this about proteins being toxic?
Well, as I point out in the first chapter, just about anything can be toxic, but we've made a lot of advances in protein science in the last 50 years or so, and it's now possible to treat people with things called cytokines, which are small proteins produced by the body that have a lot of different activities. For example, interferon, which is, of course, my great love. It was my introduction to the field of protein chemistry. Before that, I'd mostly worked with a much larger protein called hemoglobin, which is the red in your red blood cells. So, and I have, when I started, I think you might remember this, my mother used to drive me to Norfolk General Hospital to the blood lab there for my senior thesis, which eventually won a Westinghouse Prize, a Virginia Westinghouse Prize. Of course, that prize has changed a lot in name over the years. I think it's now, I know it was at some point the Intel National Science Prize, but it's, anyway, but that, of course, was just for the state of Virginia. So I've always been interested in how proteins behave, and working at Biogen back in the very early days was, of course, very exciting because we got to make interferon. And at that time, there were very few chemotherapies. The chemotherapies we had, as I point out in the book, are basically protein toxins. So they are not protein toxins, but small molecules that work on proteins within the cell that eventually make it toxic for the cell to continue to exist. So it's very hard with anything that's a conditional toxin to know exactly who is going to be most grievously hurt by a toxin, so or who it's going to help. So I think this paves the way for using botulinus toxin in things like cosmetics.
A classic toxic protein is Botox, which is a poison, correct? And
Oh,
it's now
yes.
used for migraine headaches and in different ways to control tremors. How can something so bad be so good?
Well, you have to understand the mechanism of Botox, which is that it goes to nerve terminals. And so if you can control it, how Botox works, if you can control the basic toxicity and make it work locally, I think that the key here is that Botox has to work locally, which is why the cosmetologist takes a syringe and puts it into different areas in your face. I've never had it done, but I understand it works marvelously for getting rid of all those wrinkles. And that of course was the major use for a lot. That's what people know Botox for in a lot of
Yes.
it's now Botox is the toxin that's produced if food spoils. So actually
Yes.
the name botulinus comes from the Latin word for sausage. So, and that was the original source of botulinus poisoning. And botulinus poisoning is all over the literature, actually, if you look at it. So it's why you shouldn't eat food from a can that's swollen, because we now have remarkable canning facilities. As I point out also in the book, it's kind of hard to kill yourself with botulinus toxin nowadays because we have such great control of it. That's rather facetious, of course. One of the factors of Clostridium botulinus, so the bacteria that produces the toxin originally, is that it makes spores. And the spores can exist for hundreds of years in the soil, as we know from other examples. So there's a disease in people who shear sheep that actually is due to botulinus toxin, where you get horrible looking black scars on great black scores on your arms. That's actually much less toxic than consuming the toxin. So when you eat anything that's contaminated with these spores, or when you feed a baby, for example, raw honey, which you shouldn't do, they get the toxin and it can penetrate the intestine and then go to your nervous system. And that's
Wow.
right. I think maybe the only current example that may be more painful than the death from botulinus toxin is tetanus toxin. It's very interesting because we can take the toxin, so the detoxified extracellular proteins of tetanus, of the tetanus bacteria, and use it as a vaccine. And
Yes, we do.
and the son, the son of what's his name, the president just before Calvin Coolidge. So Calvin
Yes.
Coolidge's son died of tetanus. And tetanus is an incredibly horrible disease. If you read the description of that disease back in the time, so when it was very common. So in the 1920s and the 1930s, we don't realize how common some of these microbial diseases were. For example, pertussis, which can
Yes.
choke a child to death. And children died of all kinds of strange diseases.
Well, it's interesting because regarding tetanus, all of us, even as adults, we're used to the childhood immunizations, the MMR and the polio vaccines
DTaP.
and all that. But DTaP. But it's interesting because even as adults, every 10 years, we're supposed to get a tetanus shot because of the protective nature
You
of
do
the
not want to get
detox.
tetanus. Let me put it that way. And of course,
Absolutely.
again, tetanus is produced by a microorganism that sporulates, so it can live in the soil. So
Yes.
there isn't any way really to avoid getting a
Exposed to it, right?
toxin, getting exposed to it. So it really is important to have immunity. So
Absolutely. Let me move on to my third question because I want to make sure we save some time for this question. And in scanning through your book, there's you've got something in there, the Blues Brothers Guide to Nutrition, and I just want to make sure we ask for that before we run out of time today.
Okay, well, actually, I had a lot of fun writing that, of course. There used to be a Department of Food and Nuts at MIT. Now, of course,
Mhm.
I somehow this department with time got to accumulate a whole lot of things like biochemical engineering, which of course was what I got my master's in. That was mostly affiliated with the departments of biology and chemical engineering. Anyway, but I did at that time attend lectures from people who were looking at clinical nutrition and the importance of certain vitamins. It may become as a shock to you, but even in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't clear. And even today, we're developing new answers for what vitamins we need to take. I mean, I don't
Yes.
think anybody was talking about acetyl-CoA way back in the 80s when I was a student. So anyway, the other lectures were on the basics, what people were beginning to discover about proteins. And I think the things that I'm most interested now, of course, are what makes an allergen. So this is one side of the immune system. On the other side, there is the question of, well, if this is an allergen, why is it that everybody can eat it? Why does everybody's immune system not react to allergenic proteins? Why I personally love peanut butter, and it was one of the staples of my diet when I was a graduate student. I used to live on peanut butter and jelly and peanut butter and Bacos and tomatoes and mayonnaise and lettuce on a sandwich. That was basically what I was living on, not having a whole lot of money. So this was while I was at MIT. So what I'm saying is I enjoy peanut butter, but as we know, we have a cousin Eric, and Eric will choke and potentially die if
Yes.
he's exposed to peanuts or even a related nut from walnut or cashew, as we learned to our great shock when he was a baby. And this allergy, one of the problems with allergies, and the reason why I wanted to take so much time in the book, the Blues Brothers was, by the way, a good way to sort of introduce the idea of you can get a protein, but it may not be the best protein for you. So, for example, in the Blues Brothers, the big tall drink of water wants a whole loaf of bread toasted, and that's all he wants for lunch. Whereas John Belushi's character is looking for looking for 2 whole chickens that he's going to apparently consume himself, which is just going to make him fat. On the other hand, the protein in the chicken is certainly going to be more balanced than the protein in the loaf of bread, even though
Yes.
that you can theoretically get enough protein from a loaf of bread. It's just not going to be very balanced. And
Yes.
so that gave me a way into explaining what's funny about gluten, because gluten is really a strange protein. And again, we can eat it. As I said, I was making those sandwiches on whole wheat bread at that time, probably. I hope
Which
I
is
was
high in gluten.
bread. Yeah. And I love noodles. So I can eat noodles. I can eat peanut butter. And so can 90% of the population. So this makes a problem for people who do have sensitivity to some of these proteins. So peanut allergens or gluten in the case of celiac disease, because they should not, the only real treatment for either of these diseases right now is avoidance. And avoidance is awfully hard when everybody around you is eating croissants and beautifully smelling French bread and peanut butter, as I said. But you know, peanuts are in everything. If you go to a Thai restaurant, they're in the side of
Yes, they are.
your they're everywhere. And it's not just in what you can see. Peanut protein is used in a whole lot of other applications that you may or may not be aware of. It's somewhat less now, but defatted peanut protein is one of the staples of the food industry and has been for a long time. Now, Israelis say if you just feed children, I think it's called Bama, they're very addictive little protein. Well, they're covered with peanut flour, but they're actually corn puffs. So they're corn puffs that are coated with peanut flour instead of cheese. So they're also vegan. And Again, I have to avoid these because I'm totally addicted to them. So every time I see a package, I have to say no, because it's really not the best food for me either, because it makes you gain weight, which was, of course, John Belushi's problem in the Blues Brothers. He's a little bit on the heavy side, let's put it that way. And so people who go on, for example, a diet where they only eat protein, I think it's called the caveman diet now. It had other names.
Yes, or the keto diet. Yes, so
yeah,
it's related
keto
to
diet,
that. Yes.
ketogenic diet. This can actually be quite deadly.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you really put yourself into ketosis, you're doing what diabetics have to avoid as well. So it may help you lose weight if you do it for a short time. You should probably not do it for a long time. Anyway, the chapter on the Blues Brothers was to kind of explain what the concept of how proteins are made up of amino acids and how certain amino acids have different properties than others. And for example, the amino acid proline, which occurs all over the place in glutens, is very difficult to digest because it's not one of the ones. So typical proteases in your stomach will take apart something after positively charged amino acids, but there are very few prolopeptidases. So there is now an industry to supply people who have celiac disease with a prolopeptidase, so a peptidase, a protease that will cleave after proline. But the problem with that is, well, how often do you need to take it? Because it's going to be, the prolopeptidase will be degraded in your stomach too. So it's a difficult problem to deal with. Again, until we have better solutions for how we control the proteins in our diet, the only way that people can manage these diseases right now is through avoidance, and avoidance is very hard.
But it's getting, but in fairness, it's getting better. I mean, I'm a big time food shopper because I'm a cook, and there are a lot of gluten-free options out there. I don't know how safe they are, but yes, you can get cauliflower crust pizza, for instance, which avoids the gluten
a lot
issue.
of these so-called cauliflower crust pizzas and so forth. One of the problems with going gluten-free is you're basically going protein-free, And if you look at, for example, buckwheat, you can try and get buckwheat noodles because they do contain less gluten. But if you look at the typical buckwheat noodle, it also contains wheat flour.
Yes, it does.
Well, just to hold it together. I mean, that's one of the advantages of wheat, that it's an amazing aggregation center for your bread and whatever else. So
I hear you. You can get more information about Dr. Schein's book, Conditionally Toxic Proteins, from the publisher CRC Press and, of course, Amazon.
This session is adjourned.
Thanks for joining me for Saving America. If you have questions or comments, please find me on various social media sites. I'm Dr. David D. Schein, and I will see you next week.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.